At 2:47 a.m. on a moonless night in March 2018, Captain Diego Rivera adjusted his aviator sunglasses and checked his watch one final time. What would unfold in that Arizona desert would transform a decorated war hero into one of America's most wanted fugitives, all for $53.73 million in cartel blood money. We've all faced moments of financial desperation, but what would you do if your spouse was dying and every system you trusted abandoned you? What lengths would you cross when medical bills tower higher than a military salary can reach? This is how a man with 3 tours in Afghanistan became FBI's greatest nightmare. But here's what makes this story truly extraordinary. It's not just about stealing money from one of North America's most dangerous cartels. It's about how one brilliant mind weaponized military training against both criminals and law enforcement, fooling everyone while building a criminal empire that would make seasoned kingpins envious. Before we explore this incredible transformation, hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell, because stories like this will shock you to your core. Rivera's story begins where most American tragedies do, with crushing debt and a healthcare system that fails when you need it most. 8 years of faithful service, over 2,000 flight hours across hostile territories, countless classified missions that earned respect from peers and superiors alike. Yet none of that mattered when Isabella received her diagnosis. Rare neurological conditions don't care about service records. Experimental treatments don't accept military insurance. Round-the-clock care costs more than captain's pay can cover. Bankruptcy loomed despite years of dedication to country and duty. Desperation creates opportunities that good people never thought they'd consider. In a dive bar near Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, fate introduced Rivera to Antonio El Lobo Gutierrez, a mid-level operative for Hermanos Negros Cartel. What started as casual conversation between strangers became something far more dangerous. Gutierrez recognized military bearing, aviation expertise, and most importantly, financial vulnerability. Easy money. Minimal risk. Legitimate flight credentials that could move packages across borders without arousing suspicion. Military clearance and spotless records made Rivera an ideal candidate for operations that required someone above suspicion. Initially, refusal came easily. Honor, duty, country. These weren't just words but principles carved into Rivera's identity through years of service. But principles don't pay for experimental treatments. Honor doesn't keep wives alive when insurance companies deny coverage. When Isabella's condition worsened and their savings vanished, reconsidering became inevitable. One job. One duffel bag. Mexico to New Mexico. $50,000 cash. Enough for Isabella's next treatment cycle. Just this once, Rivera told himself. Just enough to buy time. But as any law enforcement officer knows, there's rarely just one time in criminal enterprises. 18 months earlier, Rivera's life followed predictable military rhythms. Dawn reveille, briefings at 0600, cargo runs across continents that most civilians never see. Afghanistan had shaped him into something precise. A pilot who could navigate sandstorms, deliver supplies under hostile fire, and bring damaged aircraft home against impossible odds. 2,000 flight hours earned through sweat and adrenaline. Commendations stacked in personnel files. Peers respected his judgment. Superiors trusted his competence. Military life offered structure, purpose, identity, everything a career officer could want. Isabella made it complete. College sweethearts who survived deployments, relocations, and all those nights when duty called at 3 a.m. She understood classified missions meant months of silence, cryptic phone calls, and homecomings that couldn't be planned. Military wives learned patience as survival skill. Then came tremors in her left hand. Subtle at first, coffee cups rattling against saucers, handwriting becoming jagged. Neurologists ordered tests that insurance covered reluctantly. Specialists requested consultations that required prior authorization. Months passed while bureaucracy shuffled paperwork and Isabella's symptoms worsened. Rare neurological condition. Progressive. Experimental treatments available but costly. Military insurance covered standard care, not cutting-edge therapies that might actually help. Numbers became enemies. Treatment protocols cost $180,000 annually. Captain's salary barely touched $95,000 before taxes. Savings accounts emptied faster than fuel tanks on long-haul missions. Credit cards maxed. Second mortgages explored and rejected. Sometimes systems we trust most fail us when we need them most. Medical debt collectors called during duty hours. Insurance representatives explained coverage limitations with rehearsed sympathy. Isabella required full-time care while Rivera flew missions across time zones, earning barely enough to service existing debt. Desperation doesn't announce itself with dramatic moments. It accumulates like sediment, bill by bill, denial by denial, until good people consider options they never imagined. That Tuesday night in November, Rivera sat alone at Murphy's Tavern, nursing whiskey that tasted like defeat. Base housing felt empty with Isabella hospitalized again. Bills scattered across kitchen tables like tactical maps marking territory lost to creditors. Rough day, Captain? Antonio Gutierrez slid onto adjacent barstool without invitation. Mid-40s, expensive watch, confidence that suggested familiarity with getting what he wanted. Conversation flowed naturally. Military service, aviation, challenges of supporting family on government wages. Gutierrez understood financial pressure. Mentioned opportunities for skilled pilots. Discreet work. Excellent compensation. Just moving packages between private airfields. Nothing complicated. Rivera's first instinct was walking away. Honor codes don't bend for convenience. Oaths sworn before God and country carry weight beyond paychecks. But Gutierrez planted seeds in fertile ground prepared by months of mounting desperation. Think about it, Captain. Your skills are valuable. People pay premium rates for reliability. Business card exchanged hands. Phone number written in careful script. No pressure, just possibility. Family versus duty. Isabella's treatments versus military honor. Love versus law. 3 weeks later, Rivera made contact. Let me know in comments, what would you have done in Rivera's position? Would you have taken that first job? Details were simple enough. 1 duffel bag. Private airfield outside Hermosillo to ranch in southern New Mexico. Flight plan filed legitimately through military channels. Package never inspected. Questions never asked. $50,000 cash upon delivery. One time only. Emergency funds for Isabella's next treatment cycle. Enough breathing room to explore other options before next crisis hit. Rivera convinced himself this was temporary solution, just buying time until military assistance programs approved Isabella's case. One compromise to preserve everything else that mattered. Criminal psychology often begins with noble intentions twisted by impossible circumstances. Dawn broke clear over Arizona desert as Rivera pre-flight aircraft for his first smuggling run. Hands steady on controls, flight plan filed, cargo secured. Everything appeared routine except for weight settling in his chest, knowledge that crossing this line would change everything. 12 minutes airborne, moral event horizon passed without ceremony. Good men don't become criminals overnight. They fall one decision at a time. Success breeds repetition. That first $50,000 run bought Isabella 3 months of treatments, and Rivera 3 months of telling himself this arrangement was temporary. But temporary solutions have ways of becoming permanent necessities. Gutierrez called again. Different route, same simple job. Hermanos Negros needed reliable transport, and military pilots offered something civilian contractors couldn't provide, legitimate flight plans that bypassed customs scrutiny. Rivera's second run netted $60,000. Third brought $75,000. Each operation smoothed rough edges from his conscience while adding zeros to bank accounts that had been hemorrhaging money for months. Military training proved invaluable in ways Rivera never anticipated. Mission planning skills transferred perfectly to smuggling operations. Risk assessment protocols helped evaluate routes and timing. Most importantly, his security clearance and spotless service record made him invisible to law enforcement agencies that focused on traditional criminal profiles. Who suspects decorated captains of running narcotics? Air Force officers don't fit dealer stereotypes. Military transport planes moving between legitimate bases attract zero attention from Border Patrol. Rivera's greatest asset wasn't flying skill. It was credibility that came with uniform and rank. 18 months transformed reluctant participant into indispensable operator. Hermanos Negros leadership recognized Rivera's value extended beyond simple transport. His strategic mind, honed through years of mission planning and tactical analysis, identified inefficiencies in cartel operations that seasoned criminals missed. Traditional smuggling relied on brute force, overwhelming border security through volume and violence. Rivera proposed finesse instead. Legitimate military channels offered pathways that avoided confrontation entirely. Why fight battles when superior positioning eliminated conflict? Cartel hierarchy took notice. Rivera's suggestions improved success rates while reducing casualties and law enforcement attention. Trust built gradually through consistent results and innovative thinking that solved problems others couldn't address. But trust created access, and access revealed vulnerabilities. Military intelligence training taught Rivera to identify weak points in enemy structures. Applied to Hermanos Negros' organization, same principles exposed flaws that even experienced criminals overlooked. Communication protocols were predictable. Security rotations followed patterns. Financial operations concentrated wealth in predictable locations during predictable time frames. Rivera began documenting everything. Flight schedules, personnel assignments, money movement patterns. Information gathering became instinctive. Old habits from briefing rooms now applied to criminal enterprises. August 2019 brought revelation that would change everything. Cartel leadership discussed moving accumulated profits from Phoenix operations to secure facilities in Guadalajara. Months of fentanyl distribution across American Southwest had generated massive cash reserves. $53.73 million requiring transport to Mexican strongholds. Standard procedure assigned Rivera as pilot for this high-value mission. But his strategic mind recognized something leadership missed. During transit, that money would be most vulnerable it would ever be. 48 hours between Phoenix pickup and Guadalajara delivery. Window of opportunity when $53.73 million would travel with minimal security, away from heavily fortified strongholds where retrieval would be impossible. Criminal employee or criminal entrepreneur. Rivera faced choice that would define his future. Isabella's medical bills had stabilized, but treatments only slowed progression without curing underlying condition. Experimental therapies offered hope but required resources far beyond anything military salary could provide. Legitimate income would never be enough. But $53.73 million could fund every possible treatment for decades. Decision crystallized during late-night planning session in his base housing quarters. Maps spread across kitchen table where family dinners once happened. Flight routes calculated with precision that impressed even cartel logistics coordinators. Rivera wasn't just planning transport, he was designing theft. Military mind approached problems systematically. Personnel requirements, equipment needs, timing coordination, escape routes, contingency planning. Every detail received analysis that would have impressed Pentagon strategists. This wasn't desperation anymore. This was transformation. Rivera recruited carefully. Technical Sergeant Maria Santos owed gambling debts that threatened her security clearance. Staff Sergeant Kevin Park's family faced loan shark threats. Financial pressure created vulnerability, and vulnerability enabled recruitment. 3 military professionals with complementary skills. Communications specialist, logistics expert, pilot with strategic planning experience. Criminal cell built on foundation of shared desperation and military discipline. Isabella's condition worsened during planning phase. Experimental treatments showed promise but required consistent funding. Traditional employment would never provide enough resources to explore every possible therapy. But criminal empire could. Rivera studied cartel operations with intensity that once focused on enemy installations. Weakness identification became obsession. Strategic opportunities multiplied as understanding deepened. From employee to competitor required crossing line that couldn't be uncrossed. But standing on that threshold, Rivera realized he'd already traveled too far to turn back. Military officer was becoming memory. Criminal mastermind was being born. Recruitment began with careful observation. Rivera watched Santos lose another month's salary at base poker games. Desperation etched deeper into her features each time cards turned against her. Park's family photos disappeared from his desk. Loan sharks had made their threats personal. Financial vulnerability created opportunity, but Rivera needed more than desperate accomplices. Criminal enterprise required specific skills that military training provided uniquely. Santos controlled communication systems across multiple frequencies. Park managed logistics for operations spanning continents. Together, they formed a tactical unit capable of executing missions that traditional criminals couldn't attempt. Approach required delicate handling. Direct recruitment risked exposure through rejection or reporting. Instead, Rivera planted seeds through casual conversation, letting financial pressures do most persuasion work. "Heard about private sector opportunities for people with our skills," he mentioned during routine briefings. "Companies pay serious money for military expertise." Santos and Park asked questions. Rivera provided carefully crafted answers that revealed nothing while suggesting everything. Weeks passed before formal recruitment occurred, but groundwork ensured acceptance when offers came. Training sessions disguised as weekend camping trips allowed team building without arousing suspicion. Communication protocols, timing coordination, contingency planning, all presented as hypothetical exercises that built familiarity with operational requirements. Rivera's strategic analysis identified precise vulnerability window. Phoenix warehouse stored accumulated cash every third Thursday before Saturday transport to Mexico. 48 hours when $53.73 million sat with minimal security, accessible through approaches that military tactics could exploit. Standard cartel security focused on external threats, rival organizations, law enforcement raids, opportunistic criminals. Internal theft by trusted transport personnel never received consideration because betrayal seemed impossible. Military precision would exploit that blind spot. August 15th marked execution date. Rivera filed legitimate flight plan for routine cargo mission to Colorado, cover story that explained aircraft presence in Phoenix airspace. Santos prepared communication jamming equipment disguised as standard military electronics. Park coordinated ground support through network of former military contractors who asked no questions for sufficient payment. Night operations begin differently when participants understand stakes. No nervous chatter, no last-minute doubts, just professional focus that comes from training and experience. Rivera's team assembled at predetermined coordinates with efficiency that would impress Pentagon observers. While you were sleeping peacefully in your beds, military-trained operatives were executing heist of century just miles from major population centers. 2:30 a.m. approach began with Santos establishing communication blackout. Radio frequencies jammed across 5-mile radius, preventing distress calls or coordination between security personnel. Park disabled external surveillance systems using codes obtained through cartel contacts who trusted Rivera's team implicitly. Warehouse entry occurred at 2:41 a.m. Rivera led 4-person assault team through service entrance that cartel security considered too obvious for legitimate threats. Sometimes best hiding places are most visible ones. Guards expected routine pickup, not military assault. Resistance collapsed within minutes as Rivera's team moved with coordination that overwhelmed unprepared defenders. No shots fired, no casualties, just professional neutralization of obstacles between team and objective. Money was stored exactly where intelligence indicated. $53.73 million in cash, sorted by denomination and secured in military-grade containers that simplified transport. Cartel efficiency made theft easier than Rivera had anticipated. Loading required 8 minutes. Security sweep took 2 additional minutes. Total facility time, 10 minutes, 37 seconds. Military precision reduced complex heist to routine logistics operation. 2:52 a.m. saw Rivera's transport airborne with stolen fortune secured in cargo bay. Flight plan filed legitimately through military channels provided perfect cover for escape that bypassed every security measure cartels or law enforcement might deploy. Colorado Rockies offered remote drop points where money could be cached without discovery risk. Rivera had identified 17 potential locations during reconnaissance flights, selecting sites that balanced accessibility with concealment. Drop occurred at predetermined coordinates 90 miles southeast of Denver. Money transferred to civilian vehicles operated by Park's contractor network, then distributed across multiple secure locations that Rivera had established during months of preparation. If you're amazed by this military precision, smash that like button. This story gets even crazier. By dawn, Rivera's aircraft was returning to base through routine flight corridor. Official logs showed standard cargo mission to Colorado Supply Depot. Nothing unusual, Nothing suspicious. Just another day of military transport duties. Hermanos Negros discovered theft during scheduled pickup attempt 12 hours later. Warehouse showed signs of professional operation that exceeded anything local law enforcement could execute. Security footage revealed nothing useful thanks to Park's electronic countermeasures. Cartel leadership faced unprecedented situation. $53.73 million had vanished without trace, stolen by operators who left no evidence of identity or affiliation. Internal investigation found no signs of betrayal among trusted personnel. Rivera maintained routine schedule perfectly. Duty assignments, briefings, flight operations, everything continued normally while Cartel scrambled to understand how their most secure facility had been compromised. Head start advantage multiplied with each passing hour. While Hermanos Negros investigated imaginary threats, Rivera prepared misdirection campaign that would keep enemies chasing shadows while he consolidated power. Perfect crime was just beginning. Military intelligence training teaches information warfare principles that most criminals never comprehend. Rivera understood how federal agencies think, how investigations develop, and most importantly, how to make enemies chase fictional threats while real operations continue undetected. Misdirection campaign began within hours of theft discovery. Rivera accessed cartel communication networks through contacts developed during 18 months of legitimate cooperation. False messages, planted carefully through compromised channels, suggested internal power struggle between rival factions within Hermanos Negros' organization. Forged documents appeared in locations where FBI surveillance would discover them naturally. Purchase orders for weapons, meeting transcripts discussing territorial disputes, financial records showing suspicious transfers between cartel lieutenants, all fabricated with precision that came from understanding how federal prosecutors build cases. Rivera's knowledge of FBI procedures became weapon against law enforcement. Agents followed evidence trails that led nowhere while consuming investigative resources that might otherwise focus on actual perpetrators. Each false lead required weeks of verification, interviews, surveillance operations that produced nothing useful. Knowledge is power, but when used for evil, it becomes weapon of mass destruction. Cartel leadership faced crisis from multiple directions. Missing money suggested betrayal by trusted associates. FBI pressure increased through investigations targeting key personnel. Rival organizations sensed weakness and began testing territorial boundaries. Hit squads dispatched to eliminate suspected traitors found targets who genuinely knew nothing about missing funds. Violence escalated as paranoia replaced rational analysis. Hermanos Negros began destroying itself from within while Rivera watched chaos unfold from comfortable distance. Federal task forces chased shadows for months. Wiretaps captured discussions about fictional conspiracies. Surveillance teams followed suspects who led them to legitimate business meetings. Financial investigations revealed money trails that existed only in Rivera's imagination but seemed credible enough to demand thorough examination. While law enforcement and cartel resources focused on manufactured threats, Rivera built criminal empire using principles learned in military leadership courses. Recruitment targeted personnel with specific skills and financial vulnerabilities. Training emphasized discipline, loyalty, operational security, qualities that distinguished military organizations from typical criminal enterprises. $53.73 million provided foundation for operations that traditional cartels couldn't attempt. Rivera established network of safe houses, communication systems, transportation assets, and personnel that operated with technological sophistication exceeding anything law enforcement expected from criminal organizations. Phantom Network earned its name through operational methods that left minimal traces. Military-grade encryption, compartmentalized command structure, professional standards that eliminated typical criminal mistakes. Rivera's organization functioned more like special operations unit than traditional drug trafficking network. Recruitment focused on disaffected military personnel who understood value of discipline and strategic thinking. Financial incentives attracted candidates, but Rivera's leadership style retained them. Purpose, respect, fair treatment, everything that military bureaucracy had failed to provide. Former soldiers, intelligence specialists, logistics coordinators, communication experts, Rivera assembled a team that combined criminal motivation with military competence. Traditional cartels relied on intimidation and violence. Phantom Network used precision and intelligence. Operations expanded carefully across southwestern United States. drug distribution, money laundering, weapons trafficking, all conducted with efficiency that impressed even experienced criminals who encountered Rivera's organization through business arrangements. FBI's pursuit became cat-and-mouse game that captivated law enforcement community. Special Agent Lisa Chen led multi-agency task force dedicated to understanding how traditional cartel warfare had evolved into something resembling military campaign. Investigation revealed scope of Rivera's transformation from military officer to criminal innovator. Traditional methods failed against opponent who understood federal procedures better than most agents. Rivera didn't just steal money, Chen testified before Congressional Oversight Committee. Someone weaponized entire operational model against country that trained him. Irony wasn't lost on Rivera himself. Military system that had failed to support Isabella's medical needs now faced threat created by that abandonment. Training provided at taxpayer expense was being used against tax-paying citizens. Recorded conversations later obtained through warrant revealed Rivera's perspective on his transformation. "I spent years serving my country, and when I needed help, they left me to drown. Now I'm using everything they taught me against them." Isabella's treatments continued with funding that stolen money provided. Experimental therapies showed promise, but success came at cost of watching husband transform into someone she no longer recognized. Medical recovery occurred alongside moral degradation that money couldn't cure. Rivera's empire grew stronger while pursuit intensified. Federal agencies requested additional resources. Congressional hearings examined how military training could be perverted for criminal purposes. Academic institutions began studying case as example of institutional failure creating domestic threats. But success bred overconfidence, and overconfidence creates vulnerabilities that careful enemies can exploit. 6 months after stealing cartel fortune, Rivera commanded criminal enterprise that operated across 11 states with precision that made traditional organizations seem amateur by comparison. Phantom Network had evolved from desperate heist into sophisticated operation that challenged everything law enforcement understood about criminal hierarchy. Technology separated Rivera's organization from conventional cartels. Military-grade encryption protected communications. Satellite phones operating on frequencies that federal agencies couldn't monitor easily. Financial transactions routed through cryptocurrency networks that obscured money trails. Logistics coordination that rivaled multinational corporations. Each operational cell functioned independently while maintaining connection to central command structure. Compartmentalization prevented complete network exposure if individual units were compromised. Lessons learned from counterterrorism operations now protected criminal activities from federal investigation. Agent Chen's task force faced opponent unlike anything in their experience. Traditional surveillance methods failed against targets who understood federal procedures. Wiretaps produced encrypted communications that NSA specialists couldn't decode quickly enough for operational use. Financial investigations hit dead ends created by money laundering techniques that exceeded typical criminal sophistication. Cat-and-mouse game escalated as both sides adapted tactics to counter opponent strategies. Federal resources increased while Phantom Network expanded operations. Media attention grew as law enforcement struggled to explain how military-trained criminals had gained such advantages over traditional investigative methods. But power extracted prices that money couldn't pay. Isabella watched husband transform into stranger who shared her bed but no longer shared her values. Medical treatments funded by stolen money saved her life while destroying everything else that made life worth living. Recovery meant watching Rivera become someone she no longer recognized or respected. Dinner conversations became interrogations about daily activities. Phone calls were monitored through applications Rivera installed without permission. Social interactions required approval from husband, who trusted no one completely. Love had become prison with bars made of paranoia and suspicion. Rivera's isolation grew as criminal responsibilities consumed energy once devoted to family relationships. Military friendships ended as former colleagues noticed behavioral changes that suggested involvement in activities they couldn't support. Base housing felt like foreign territory where every conversation might contain hidden surveillance attempts. Criminal leadership demanded decisions that decent people couldn't make. Rival organizations tested Phantom Network boundaries through violence that required responses escalating beyond Rivera's comfort zone. Maintaining respect in criminal community meant adopting methods that military honor codes would never permit. Yet power also brought satisfaction that legitimate career had never provided. financial security that military salary couldn't offer, respect from subordinates who appreciated competent leadership, success measured through results rather than bureaucratic evaluations that ignored actual accomplishments. Rivera's empire reached peak influence during late 2020. Drug distribution networks spanning from Texas to Oregon. Money laundering operations processing hundreds of millions annually. Personnel roster including former military specialists from every service branch. Technological capabilities that impressed even federal analysts studying captured equipment. Criminal community recognized Phantom Network as force that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. Traditional cartels sought partnerships while rival organizations avoided direct confrontation. Law enforcement agencies requested federal assistance that acknowledged local departments couldn't handle threat of this magnitude. Congressional hearings examined how military training could be perverted for criminal purposes. Academic conferences analyzed case studies of institutional failure creating domestic threats. International intelligence services studied Rivera's methods as potential template for future criminal innovation. Rivera commanded respect and fear from enemies who understood his capabilities exceeded anything they had encountered previously. Federal agents acknowledged privately that traditional investigative methods might prove insufficient against opponents who understood their procedures better than most colleagues. But success created complacency that careful observers could exploit. Rivera began believing mythology that subordinates created around his achievements. Man who once flew cargo missions now saw himself as criminal mastermind destined for greatness that would surpass anything conventional organizations had accomplished. But here's what Rivera didn't realize. Every empire falls, and his was about to crumble in most spectacular way. Success poisoned Rivera's judgment in ways that failure never could. By early 2021, criminal empire had grown beyond anything he originally envisioned, and with that growth came dangerous delusions about his own invincibility. Military strategists who once calculated every risk now made decisions based on ego rather than analysis. Expansion accelerated beyond sustainable limits. New territories demanded personnel Rivera hadn't properly vetted. Operations required trust in associates whose loyalty hadn't been tested through adversity. Phantom Network's careful compartmentalization began breaking down as rapid growth outpaced security protocols. Rivera's fatal error came through recruiting Marcus Webb, former Army intelligence specialist whose financial troubles made him appear ideal candidate. Webb possessed exactly the skills Phantom Network needed for Eastern expansion: communications expertise, surveillance capabilities, strategic planning experience that complemented existing operations. But desperation creates vulnerability, and Webb's gambling debts exceeded anything legitimate employment could resolve. Federal task force had identified his weakness months before Rivera's recruiters made contact. When arrest came for unrelated charges, Webb faced choice between cooperation and life imprisonment. Pride comes before fall, and Rivera's ego became his greatest enemy. Webb's confession provided Agent Chen with operational details that years of investigation hadn't uncovered. Communication frequencies, safe house locations, personnel assignments, financial networks, everything federal agencies needed to dismantle organization that had eluded capture through superior operational security. Information quality exceeded anything task force had obtained through traditional investigative methods. Webb knew command structure, operational procedures, and most importantly, Rivera's location patterns that surveillance teams could exploit for tactical advantage. Federal response mobilized resources that reflected threat assessment, acknowledging Phantom Network's capabilities. Multiple agencies coordinated assault plans that assumed military-level resistance. SWAT teams, federal marshals, DEA specialists, FBI tactical units. Concentration of law enforcement that reflected respect for opponents' training and equipment. Rivera's paranoia reached breaking point as operational security deteriorated. Communication intercepts suggested federal pressure increasing across multiple network nodes. Personnel disappeared without explanation. Financial accounts showed suspicious activity that indicated possible law enforcement monitoring. Utah compound represented Rivera's final stronghold, remote facility where he could control access while maintaining communication with remaining loyal personnel. Isolation provided security but also created trap if enemies identified location and coordinated sufficient force for successful assault. Facility preparations reflected military defensive thinking applied to civilian structure. Multiple exit routes, communication redundancy, weapons caches, transportation assets that could facilitate escape if perimeter was breached. Rivera's strategic mind prepared for siege that his ego refused to believe could actually succeed. March 15, 2021 marked endgame beginning. Federal agencies surrounded compound using coordination that acknowledged targets' military training and probable resistance capabilities. Helicopter support, armored vehicles, specialized equipment, assault force that reflected lesson learned from years of unsuccessful pursuit. Rivera recognized tactical situation through surveillance systems that monitored approaches from multiple directions. Federal positioning eliminated most escape routes while maintaining firepower advantage that made resistance futile. Military assessment concluded that surrender offered only rational choice. But rational thinking had been compromised by months of criminal leadership that demanded appearances of strength regardless of actual circumstances. Rivera couldn't accept defeat that would destroy mythology built around his transformation from military officer to criminal mastermind. Helicopter escape attempt began as federal perimeter tightened around compound facilities. Rivera's aviation skills provided last advantage in situation where traditional criminal leaders would have no options remaining. Military transport sitting on private landing strip offered potential freedom if timing and execution could overcome tactical disadvantages. Rotor blades began spinning as federal agents approached facility entrances. Rivera's military training provided confidence that superior flying ability could overcome law enforcement coordination that relied on ground-based assets with limited aviation support. But hubris had blinded strategic thinking that once made Rivera a formidable opponent. Federal task force anticipated escape attempt and positioned resources accordingly. Aviation units waited beyond visual range while ground forces maintained pressure that forced hasty departure without proper reconnaissance. Helicopter lifted off just as federal breach began. Momentary success suggested escape might succeed despite overwhelming odds. But task force coordination exceeded Rivera's tactical assessment. Air support appeared from multiple directions while ground units secured evidence that would ensure conviction regardless of capture outcome. Aviation chase lasted 17 minutes before mechanical failure forced emergency landing in terrain that eliminated further escape possibilities. Rivera's luck had finally expired after years of evading justice through superior planning and execution. Federal agents found Rivera unconscious in helicopter wreckage. Military training finally insufficient against mechanical failure and overwhelming pursuit coordination. Emergency medical treatment saved his life for trial that would expose every detail of Phantom Network operations to public scrutiny. Capture ended criminal empire that had challenged federal law enforcement capabilities for over 2 years. Rivera's transformation from decorated Air Force captain to Kingpin became case study examined in military academies and law enforcement training facilities worldwide. Academic institutions analyzed how institutional failure created domestic threats. Congressional committees investigated gaps in veteran support systems that allowed financial desperation to corrupt military personnel. Policy recommendations emerged from recognition that abandoned heroes could become dangerous enemies. Isabella survived her neurological condition through treatments funded by stolen money, but recovery came at devastating personal cost. Husband's imprisonment meant facing future alone with knowledge that her medical bills had provided rationalization for crimes that destroyed countless lives. Divorce proceedings began while Rivera awaited sentencing. Isabella's testimony revealed human cost of criminal transformation that statistics could never capture. Love had become casualty of desperation that good intentions couldn't excuse or justify. Rivera received multiple life sentences without possibility of parole. Federal prosecutors successfully argued that military training made him particularly dangerous threat to national security. Appeals failed as evidence of criminal empire's scope overwhelmed any sympathy for financial circumstances that initiated his transformation. Prison interviews revealed man struggling to reconcile conflicting identities. Military officer who had sworn oath to protect and defend versus criminal mastermind who had exploited that training for personal gain. Cognitive dissonance between service ideals and criminal reality created psychological burden that incarceration couldn't resolve. Lessons from Rivera's story transcend individual tragedy to reveal broader truths about human nature and institutional responsibility. Desperation can make good people do terrible things when systems they trust fail during critical moments of need. Financial pressure combined with inadequate support structures creates vulnerability that criminal organizations exploit systematically. Skills we use to serve can be corrupted to destroy when circumstances overwhelm moral foundations that military training assumes but doesn't always reinforce adequately. Technical competence without ethical grounding becomes weapon against society that provided both. No criminal empire, no matter how sophisticated, can outrun justice forever when law enforcement adapts methods to match criminal innovation. Rivera's temporary success reflected federal agencies' learning curve rather than fundamental immunity from consequences. Sometimes systems we fight can become our greatest enemies when institutional failures create conditions that transform protectors into threats. Military personnel require support structures that prevent financial desperation from compromising moral clarity. Rivera's legacy serves as warning about consequences when good people face impossible choices without adequate institutional support. His story reveals how quickly honor can become memory when survival demands compromise of fundamental principles. What's most shocking part of Rivera's story to you? Let me know in comments below. And if you want more incredible true crime stories like this, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because in our next video, we're diving into another case that will sure blow your mind. Speaking of military precision turned criminal, wait until you hear about Navy SEAL who infiltrated 3 different criminal organizations simultaneously while maintaining active duty status. That story makes Rivera's transformation look simple by comparison.